Good morning, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share my story. For those of you who are younger, I see younger out there, lots of younger, you may not remember a lot about the Columbine shootings. You might have been a child when these things occurred. So I think it's important first to go back and sort of look at what happened. About almost 20 years ago, my son, who was 17 years old, and his friend, Eric, entered Columbine High School with the intent of killing everyone in the school. Fortunately, they did not succeed in doing that. But they killed 12 students and a teacher before taking their own lives. They injured, and the number that I give is 24, because I really don't know how many people were injured. It would depend on how that was counted. Do you need me for something?
I want to hear this.
Got it? Thank you. Okay. The people who were injured had to, many of them are still suffering from their injuries. I've become friends with one of the girls who has a spinal cord injury. And when I'm with her, every few minutes, when she'll be talking, she will just sort of wince and double over with pain. And that's because she has ongoing nerve pain for the rest of her life from her injury. She also is a paraplegic and can't walk. So people who sustained injuries, head injuries, facial disfigurement, this is something that will never go away. They'll have to deal with this for the rest of their lives. These things involve psychological trauma, as well as costs for special vehicles, special housing. There was damage to a school. Now, Columbine was a new school at the time, and when this happened, the school was not virtually destroyed, but I think we could say it was destroyed psychologically, so that people were unable to go back in school. And there was a lot of talk about what will we do with this building. Some people insisted that the parents of the shooters should contribute millions of dollars to replace the building. I did not have that kind of money, even if I had wanted to do such a thing. I was not able to do that. Other people thought they should keep the school and remodel it. Where would the funds come from, with funds being as difficult as they are to obtain? So it turned out in the community that there was fundraising done to rebuild the school, to change it so that when you walked in, you didn't see the same things or experience the same things. They changed the look of it. They changed the location of the library where most of the kids died. We can't even begin to think about the psychological damage that something like this causes, because it's a ripple effect. It goes on for years and years. I was at a suicide prevention function not long ago, and they had a firefighter there from one of the local districts. And he said that within his fire department, following the event, because they were part of the rescue efforts, people were struggling with depression and PTSD. And in his local fire department, they'd had 6 suicides just from the aftermath of the trauma. And one of the things that was difficult for them was that their chief didn't want it to be known that their workers were struggling because of this stigma. And because in this environment, everybody was suing everybody and blaming everybody. And he didn't want to surface as making it seem that his team wasn't tough enough to deal with this. So he said to his staff, if you need counseling, you are not allowed to go out for counseling. I'm going to bring a counselor in here, and that person will talk to you. And consequently, over a period of a couple of years, there were 6 suicides within that department. Another example of the kind of trauma you might not think about, what about the hospitals? Kids were their injured children were being taken to hospitals around the city. One of the things that a hospital administrator shared was how unfair it seemed to him that the kids who were victims of shootings got all kinds of media attention and gifts and visits from football players, and yet other people were in that hospital with spinal cord injuries and head injuries who were being ignored by the public. But there's this outpouring of love and honor for the victims, and it puts those who are not in that position in a difficult place because their loved ones too have had, you know, head injuries, debilitating injuries, but they don't get the recognition, the attention, even the praise for being a victim of a high-profile event such as that. In one of the presentations I gave about a year or two ago, someone came up to me after the presentation and she said, you know, I count my child as a victim of the Columbine shootings too, even though she wasn't at the school. And I asked her, you know, tell me about that. And her little girl was 9 years old. She was in a hospital in the Denver area. She had cerebral palsy and was having a spinal fusion, believe it or not, on the day of the shootings. This child was placed into ICU, and when the shootings happened, she was removed from ICU to make way for all the injured kids coming in, and her little girl was put into a room. And the lady said to me, she had the nurse from hell, she got poor care, she got an infection, and she died. So that's another example of the things we may not think about when we think of a tragedy like this. Lawsuits. Everybody was suing everybody. Our family was sued by 36 family members. The lawsuits hung over our heads as a family for 4 years. We didn't finally get deposed until 4 years after. So during that time, I was living with the terror that I would be, I'd lose my home, we'd lose all of our income. People were on TV threatening us, saying they were going to sue us for $200 million. And I would say, you know, good luck with that, because I don't have $200 million. But it was a very frightening time. Lawsuits make it difficult for people to talk and to build community when they need to. And that's one of the things that occurs after a tragedy like this. Blame. Everybody is blaming everybody, excuse me. And when there's blame and when lawyers are involved, people don't talk and people don't share. So it took me years to try to understand what had happened that day and to talk with people and talk to someone in the school. And those things are impeded just because a legal process is taking place. I was not allowed to go to a support group for survivors of suicide loss, which I eventually identified as being a survivor of suicide loss. But my lawyer said to us, you can't go to a support group because if you tell your story to someone in that group and your case goes to trial, then you've turned them into witnesses and you're forcing them possibly to testify against you. And so very early on, I was not able to go to any venue like that where I could talk to people that might help. What about how they got guns? That involved a legal problem too. Dylan we had never owned any guns in our home. I'm one of these people that just is not on board with owning guns because I believe it increases risk. And my son, who was only 17, managed to purchase 2 guns. One was purchased legally through a straw purchase. His friend, Robin, who was a girl, went into a gun show, bought a shotgun, and she was 18. And she handed the gun over to Dylan. And Dylan, that was legal, that was allowed. The other gun he bought from a young man who thought Dylan was 18 years old because he had met him at the gun show, and you're supposed to be 18 to go to a gun show. So Dylan, so this young man was selling one of his own guns, and he thought he was complying with the law. He never asked Dylan how old he was. Dylan was a graduating senior, so he made the assumption that he was 18. And for selling Dylan his gun, he got a 6-year prison sentence. The other issue that comes up often is that Columbine was the event that caused copycats, that sort of set the stage for making events like this high profile. And I like to remind people that Dylan and Eric themselves were copycatting. And Dylan kept, I didn't know he had writings, but after he died, the police found that he had been writing in pages of notebook paper, not a real journal, but just pages stuck randomly in places. And they referred to this event that they were planning as NBK, and that stands for Natural Born Killers. It's the name of a movie. So copycatting is not a new thing. It did not begin with Columbine. It's been here a very long time. So one thing I always want to talk about is when this happened, it was, I got hate mail, I got asked everywhere, I would read articles, and the one question I kept getting asked over and over again was, how could you not know? And really, that was the question I was asking myself. When this first happened, I was in such a state of shock. I didn't understand what had happened. It would take me years to piece together the things that had happened. From my own story, I had two boys. Dylan was my son who was graduating from high school. He had been accepted at 4 colleges. He'd been accepted at the University of Arizona. That was his first choice school. And the year before he died, about 14 months before he died when he was a junior, he'd had some trouble in school. He got in trouble for scratching a locker. He and his friends hacked into the school computer system to get locker combinations because his friend wanted to leave a nasty note in the locker of a boy who was trying to get a girl that he liked. So that was, the usual well-thought-out plan that a teenage boy might have. So, he was suspended for that. He and Eric also got arrested because they stole something from a van that was parked on the country road near where we lived. Those things happened in a cluster when he was in his junior year. Now, Dylan was the kind of kid that had never been in trouble before. He was a good kid. He was in a gifted program. He'd never had any kind of a diagnosis of any kind of a problem. Every year when I'd go to teacher conferences, I would always ask, is he getting along with other people? Is there anything I need to be concerned about? And the answer was always no, that he's doing fine. So that spell of trouble right there concerned me very much. I didn't understand. Now, at the time, I was asking people, friends, neighbors, lawyer, because he had to have a lawyer when he stole that equipment from the van. And I was saying, what does this mean? Does this mean something? And everybody assured me, Dylan is such a good kid. Don't worry about Dylan. Kids act out. You should see the stuff that I did when I was a teenager. And then I'd hear all these crazy stories of boys, urinating off the top of the school and having all kinds of fun and saying, don't worry about this. This is not something to be concerned about. When I went to the diversion counselor, when Dylan got into a diversion program where he would receive counseling and drug visits and anger management classes instead of going to jail, the first thing I asked her was, does this mean something? Do you think he needs counseling? And she turned to Dylan and said, what do you think, Dylan? Do you think you need counseling? And Dylan said, no, I don't need counseling. And he said, and I'll prove it to you. I will prove to you that I can get my life back on track. And that is exactly what he did. He continued with school, had no more trouble. He completed the rest of his years. He was in school plays, and he held a job. So from my perspective as a parent, observing behaviors, I didn't see anything that was odd or different. Yes, sometimes he was moody. He had a computer that he built, and he would be in his room a lot on his computer. But he didn't do that exclusively. He had friends, he went bowling, he went to movies, he would go out for dinner with us as a family. And in the days leading up to the shootings, it was the end of senior year, he was ready to graduate, and he made a comment about that they were going to do a school prank. And I remember saying to Dylan, no pranks, you can't do a prank because you just got out of a diversion program. Oh, that was another thing. He was terminated from the diversion program early because the counselor believed that he and Eric were exemplary and that there was no need for them to continue because their behavior indicated that there were no issues and that they should be allowed to terminate early. So in my head, everything was going along fine. Columbine, the shootings happened on a Tuesday. That weekend before the shootings, Dylan went to his high school prom. He went with 12 friends, rented a limousine, and they were all dressed up when they had their corsages and, the long dresses and the tuxes. And that Friday, he sat down with my husband and he picked his dorm room for college and he measured the square footage to get the biggest room. Then they had the prom, and that night he came home early in the morning, and I got up to talk with him, and he thanked me. He said, I had the best time of my life. Thank you so much for paying for all this. He held up a little flask that came from God knows where, and he said, I want you to see this, and I want you to know it had alcohol in it, but I didn't drink any. You can trust me. And I said, well, I trust you. And 3 days later, the shootings happened. That morning of the shootings, I had gotten up very, very early in the morning. It was dark, 5 o'clock, because I had to go downtown to work. And Dylan had a bowling class that morning, and he had to get up early. And I always was the one that woke him up. And that particular morning, I heard him thundering down the stairs past my bedroom door on the way to go. And I didn't understand why he was up so early. And I opened the door, and I yelled, Dill, and he just yelled, bye, and slammed the front door and drove away. And that was the last time I heard his voice. And I turned to my husband and I said, I think you were right. Something is bothering him, because my husband had said to me, Dylan seems a little tense to me. Something is bothering him. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the pitch of his voice is just slightly higher than usual. And I said, I didn't notice that. And, maybe he's nervous because of the prom. I mean, he's never been to one before. It's the end of the school year. And my husband said, maybe. But when that happened, I woke up Tom and I said, something is wrong. Something is bothering him. Now, I had no idea we were talking a life and death situation. I thought it was something interpersonal, something that he needed to work out with a friend. And I said to my husband, who worked from home, will you be here today to talk with him when he comes home? And he said, sure, I'm always here. And we always talk, and we have a snack. And I'll talk to him. And I went off to work thinking that all was well. And about noon that day, I saw a message from my husband. I was getting ready to go somewhere. And it was his voice cracking, gasping, saying, something terrible has happened. This is an emergency, call me back. And then I knew right then that something had happened to one of our children. And when I called him, he took the phone and he said, listen to the television. And he put the phone to the TV. I couldn't hear anything. I just heard static. And I'm screaming into the phone, what's happened, what's happened? And then he got back on and he said, there's a shooting at the school. They think Dylan may be involved. Kids in trench coats are shooting people. And he just poured, and I just said, I'm coming home. And that began a nightmare that lasted for years and years. At first, I couldn't believe that Dylan was there willingly, and I had a very strong, embedded place of denial. And people were saying that he did all these bad things, but in my head, that it didn't make sense. Why do you prepare for your future and go to a prom, and how can you be doing these things and be preparing for death, for your own death and for the death of other people? So I had, and many of Dylan's friends had the same belief, that this was supposed to be some kind of a theater thing or a prank, and it got out of hand, and somebody had switched real guns for toy guns. I mean, I know it sounds silly and it sounds very naive, but I really believed that for a long time. And for 6 months, when I finally got the police report of what happened, I was in that place of believing that my son was not capable of intentionally hurting others. And then I heard the truth was that they had prepared this, it was a plan, and yes, Dylan had intentionally hurt other people. And it began the grief process for me all over again, because I had been grieving for the child that I had preserved and invented in my mind. In reality, I was now going to have to grieve for someone I didn't know to start that process over. So my path, through years of therapy, I mean, I got breast cancer, I had PTSD, I had all kinds of things that I had to work on to get through this. What I think helped me and saved me was, at some point, I came to the realization that Dylan had died by suicide. That he was, after 6 months, after I got the police report, the police shared some journals with me, and in those journals, Dylan had written down at the age of 15, "I am in agony. I want to get a gun and I want to kill myself." He talked about cutting himself. He said, "I became Mr. Cutter. I am cutting myself." Now, I didn't know these things were going on, and none of his friends knew it, but he was working so hard to preserve this image that things were fine, and he did it so well. So my path was trying to understand his own suicidality. And as I believe, and as the experts believe that I've talked with, that his being there and doing this was really because of his own suicidality. I have learned in the years since then, now, that 78% of school shooters are suicidal at the time of the shootings. They have suicidal feelings. So I believe, and I'm an advocate for prevention. Suicide is preventable. And if we can help those who are suicidal when they are having a suicidal crisis, they don't have to lose their lives. And in the rare cases of murder-suicides, their victims don't have to lose their lives. It's estimated that about 1% of all suicides are murder-suicides. And murder-suicides that are mass shootings are a very small percent of that 1%. They are still, even though we see them on the news all the time, they are still a statistical rarity. It's not something that's likely to happen. But not everyone who is suicidal, of course, is homicidal. It's a very small fraction. But there are a lot of people who are having thoughts and feelings of suicide, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of being preoccupied, being in pain. And chances are a large percent of us in this room know people who are experiencing those feelings or are experiencing them ourselves. I wanted to mention that not many people know, but I'm a member of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, one of their advisory councils. And the head of the Lifeline told me that the Aurora Theater shooter called the Lifeline for suicide prevention before he went to the theater. And what happened was he called during a time when there was a technical glitch, and the lines were shut down and he didn't get to connect with anyone, but they were able to follow up and see that this individual had actually called a lifeline. So we can never underestimate the importance of that kind of intervention when someone is in crisis. So I see I'm going to have to hurry along here. So signs of suicide could be talking about being a burden to others. Dylan never did that. Feeling trapped, feeling isolated, feeling that one has no hope. Those are not signs that many of us can see unless someone shares those with us or unless we know how to ask if those things are there. I did not know how to ask that question. I did not even know that asking the question was something I might have done. And this is why I do what I do and try to help people understand that there are things we can do. My greatest regret as a parent is that I didn't just shut up and listen. I would ask Dylan all the same questions I had been asked growing up. How was your day? How was school? How are your friends? What are you doing this weekend? I don't think I ever got into a position where I really sat down with the intention of listening. I can remember when I was a child, if I go to my mother and say, you know, I'm ugly, nobody likes me, I'm stupid, what does a mom say? I think you're pretty, I think you're smart, you know, I love you. Well, by saying those kinds of things, we are effectively denying that feeling. We are so uncomfortable when our loved ones are uncomfortable that we try to fix it. And I have learned the importance of not trying to fix things when I talk with people now. That by saying, you're okay, I think you're pretty, what you're essentially saying is, you shouldn't have those feelings. You don't have those feelings, because we are uncomfortable with that. So I try to help people have a chance that I did not have, to listen and to absorb, to sit comfortably with someone's crisis. It's terrifying when someone we love wants to die, but the thing that we can do to help them is to listen to that and validate that feeling and reassure them that we love them, we're going to be there, we're going to get help. I feel somewhat optimistic about what's happening now. I know for the people, all of you out there who are on the front lines, dealing with behavioral health is like trying to change a tire as you're going down the freeway. It's like all these people have all these needs, and you're at this crushing transition point where people are beginning to realize that they can get help for the difficult, bad feelings they're having. But we don't have all the things in place to help them yet. We don't have all the answers to make effective treatment choices that we know are the right choice in that situation. So what I see happening, if nothing else, the one thing that from my personal perspective is that when we talk about some of these terrible tragedies that occurred, less and less I hear them referred to as an issue of good and evil. I hear them being referred to as someone being out of control, of being in a place where they lost access to their own tools of self-governance and reason. That is encouraging to me. And I also see that going through all the systems that we interact with, things are changing. I was at a suicide prevention event not long ago, and all of us had lost loved ones to suicide. About half of us in the room were like me and had no idea that the person that they loved had struggled, and struggled for a long time in many cases. And about the other half had loved ones who had struggled. They had done everything they knew how to do. They had sought therapy. They had been in and out of hospitals. They had medication. And unfortunately, their story had a tragic end as well. But to me, that points out exactly what we need to do. Number one, we have to educate ourselves. I believe that every person, every citizen should take mental health first aid. I believe that every professional who works with other people in schools or hospitals should have mental health first aid and at least some kind of a suicide intervention training. QPR, ASSIST, there are many of them. Because these medical crises, most people who get intervention when they're in crisis don't go on to die by suicide. And there is something we can do. And I urge all of us to know more, to be more responsive, because ultimately we might be that person who is with that person at the end of their lives, and we may not even know that we are dealing with an individual who is very close to his own death. So I think I'm seeing that I'm over my time. I'm going to stop, and I think we're going to have some questions. So come on up, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story with us, and we do have a few minutes to discuss. The theme today is stories, and I wonder if you could reflect back on the first time you chose to tell the story publicly. How did you know you were ready?
Well, it was 6 years after the event. I had been through a lot of therapy, I'd read a lot of books, and I happened to meet a few other survivors of murder-suicide. And we decided it was time for us to try to begin to educate people about murder-suicide. And there was a conference in Colorado. It was the Violence Goes to College conference in Boulder. And 3 or 4 of us got together and decided to do a panel. And what I found out leading up to that panel was I went into terrible anxiety. I mean, I had debilitating panic attacks. I could hardly get myself to be there because I had never faced, I'm always afraid when I face an audience that someone in that audience may have lost a loved one because of my son. So I ended up videotaping my part so that if I was completely incapacitated and couldn't answer some of the questions, I could hit a button. And I did, I lived through it. That was the first time. And all of us on that panel, it took months for us to recover. But after that, I just said, you've done it, you can do it again.
And when you speak, what do you hope telling the story will give the audience?
And this is hard to talk about, but I wish with all of my heart that someone had helped my son. And I don't want anyone to ever go through what our family and our community has gone through. So I am hoping that something I say may help someone out there help somebody else and prevent a tragedy.
I'm sure you get a lot of reactions when you speak. What's the best experience you've had of someone coming up after, and what'd they say? What did they say? How did it touch you?
One of the conferences I spoke at was a conference for parents of children with special needs. And I really didn't know if I was going to be able to relate or not, because technically Dylan was not a child with special needs. He was a kid that made us feel like great parents up until his death. But at that conference, when I saw people relate to me, one lady came up to me and hugged me and said her son was on death row, and she felt that I was speaking for him as well, and that meant a lot to me.
Our theme here is equity. I wonder if, as you've spoken, as you've learned about this issue, you can reflect on your family circumstances, what did and didn't happen, and how that compares with other people who you may have interacted with who were in different circumstances.
And I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you talking about access to resources? Or I'm not sure where you're going.
It could be, I'll let you take it where you think, okay. But that's a good starting place.
You know, I feel that in my situation, it was not, being privileged as we were or not privileged, it didn't make any difference in our case. Ours was simply a case of someone in our family was struggling and we were not aware of it. If I had known, I would have tried to get resources to help. And I think the story that I tell is a more universal one, and that is every one of us can be suffering and struggling. The person next to you can be, people in your home. And they may be working very hard to not show you that they are vulnerable, that they are afraid, that they are crumbling. And that is more the message I have. It kind of crosses lines of equity. It's all of us.
I was really struck as a parent as you told the story about listening and the questions you asked and the way we are sort of taught to respond to the pain and the hurt of others. How do you, other than sort of giving the message that we should listen better, how do we learn to not be, to move away from sort of the gut reaction, the natural tendency to tell our loved ones everything's okay. You're going to be okay. You're beautiful. You're smart. You're funny.
I think part of that learning is really adjusting our own thinking. We hear on one hand that you know we have a behavioral health crisis, suicide levels are rising. We have reason to be terrified. But also, I'm a big believer in mindset, and I have, you know, stories about, you know, medical studies where people believe that something is healing, and it is because they believe that. I think having the belief that we can do something and what we can do will work is an important part of making it work. So that's sort of where I come from, to say, yes, I will sit with you in your hour of discomfort and fear and terror. And I will respect that and have your, you know, and understand that you have those feelings. But also working toward, you know, how did we make a plan for self-care? What do we do when we feel like this? And really have the belief that our interventions usually do help and we can make a difference.
You described your son's behavior, and as you noted, and as those around him noted, they seemed typical. They seemed age appropriate for a teenage boy.
Right.
And I know you've done a tremendous amount of soul searching. The detail with which you tell the story of what happened in the days and hours before, it's clear you've run that through your head, I can only imagine.
Yes.
How many times? So as you've learned about the topic, as you've spoken with others, how do we tell the difference between the natural anxiety of teenage development and warning signs that warrant a different kind of response?
It's very difficult to tell the difference, and that's where the importance of effective communication comes in. You know, risks of suicide might be, you know, talking about death or writing about death. Well, many of us do that, or many teens especially. It may be a change in sleep patterns, eating patterns, grooming. It may be sleeping too much or too little. It can be withdrawing or isolating, using substances, drinking too much. Well, all these are behaviors that are common in adolescence. So the important piece here is to learn how to ask questions, even tangentially. I asked a psychiatrist once, I said, what should a parent ask a kid? What do you do? How do you get this conversation started? And he said what he liked to use was, tell me something about yourself that no one understands, but that causes you pain. And then he said the important thing is when they start to talk, shut up. You know, just say, tell me more about that. Like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't have, you know, you wish you had this or you had that? I give you that. Because as parents, I was in a store the other day and I heard a parent arguing with a teenager. And the teenager, she must have asked, oh, can I get that necklace with the matching earrings? And all I could hear was the mother's side of this. Why do you need matching earrings? I don't have matching earrings. And, you know, it was just spiraling off when I think, you know, all she had to say was a reflective listening. So you really like that with the matching earrings. Tell me more about that. Yeah.
You've spoken a lot about how parents and families and communities engage. There's a whole policy world out there that make lots of decisions. You talked about the legal environment.
Yes.
Any reflections on the policy guidance you would offer to those who make our laws that could be helpful?
Oh, I'd love to get into policy, but I don't want to. I mean, I have certain things that I think are very important, and I will just share one of them. And I believe that red flag laws are important because they distance someone from firearms when they are in a crisis. You can get a court order to temporarily remove firearms from them if they are deemed by a judge to be a threat to themselves or someone else. I mean, I think policies, we have to involve policies to bring some sanity to all the things that are going on now. And I think there are many things that policy can do to make it easier for us to help people who need it when they need it and make sure they get the right help.
Well, Sue, thank you for sharing your story, for being bold enough to stand up in front of all of us and share your experience. It's enlightening, it's empowering for us, as I suppose it is for you as well, and very grateful for your
Thank you, Alan, and thank you all very, very much for the opportunity.